This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, no beep, but I think we're recording. Hi everyone. My name's Mick. Welcome to our webinar today on using QGIS in the classroom. Or really just an introduction because 1 hour we certainly can't do it justice, but welcome along. It's good to see a little group. I didn't expect we'd have dozens, just because it is a more sort of intermediate or advanced. It's advanced level. So congratulations on all of you for being here and taking on the challenge. But hopefully you'll find, um, with a little bit of time and so forth, a little bit of drive, you will get there, and hopefully I can help you today. Let's get a few of the little bits and pieces out of the way. So the interface today's GoToMeeting, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat window. There's already been a bit of interaction. I'll just copy the slides again. I'll pop them in there so anyone who has just turned up can follow the presentation along, and it has links out. So yeah, any questions in that chat window, and periodically I'll go in there and make an effort to see if there's any questions. Okay, and of course we are recording as well. So first I'd like to begin just by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we're all learning today. I'm in the Turrbal and Jagera nations, and we at Contour Education recognise we're learning and working on lands where sovereignty was not ceded. Our data, I suppose we're looking at just a little bit of housekeeping first. Our data for the day is in that link. You can see there, you can, if you're in Google Drive and signed in, you can actually make a copy of that account and keep it. You make a duplicate of it in your Google Drive, and you can then edit it and do stuff with it, but you won't need to. But certainly you'll find our data there. You can download that, and if you haven't already, you can unzip that folder, pop it into your GIS data folder. It's handy to have a GIS data folder to sort of have everything organized, and yeah, extract it in that folder, and you can use it a bit later on. Right. Hello, I'm Mick. Here's where you can get me. Email is probably the best. I have a mobile phone number. I don't know if anyone wants that. It's in my email. We're also on Twitter and Facebook as well. Facebook, we tend to post sort of 3 or 4 times a week with various interesting maps and little bits and pieces about spatial that we find. And Twitter, I suppose, is a bit more sort of news and occasional interactions. It's a weird place, Twitter. Okay, so any questions before we get stuck in? Is everyone okay? I hope that link works. Let me know if that link to the presentation doesn't work. And also let me know if you're having any issues with that demo data that I put in there. That's just some Queensland road data, but we'll play with that later. But yeah, let me know now in the chat, and I can hopefully help you. So our agenda is very quickly, we're going to have a quick look at what QGIS actually is and where it fits into the bigger picture of spatial technologies in the classroom. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about spatial data. It's, with QGIS, you're working directly with the data, whereas a lot of the online GIS tools that I've been showing teachers over the past few webinars and that I've been promoting for years, a lot of those online tools are, the data management's already done, and you just get to, effectively turn a layer on or off. Whereas with QGIS, you are playing with the layers of data themselves and kind of the back end, if you will. So we're going to talk a little bit about spatial data, go through some of those terms that you might see around the place, and I just want to talk to you about what makes spatial data important and how you need to set it up so that you can bring it in and use it. And then we're going to have a demo of QGIS. You can jump on. I've just seen we've had someone arrive, so I'm just going to give them a copy of the presentation. But we're going to do a demo of QGIS. I'm going to show you how to open QGIS. I'm going to show you how to open up some data that's in there already, plus the data that I've downloaded for you. We're going to look at the basics in terms of navigating the data, zooming in and out, and then keeping an eye on time, but I'd really like to be able to show you how to create some data and then turn that into a map, I think they call it a layout. So that's kind of the rough agenda. And then right at the end, actually I put it before the demo, but I've got some links on where you can go for support and where you can go to find data to get started. So hopefully you can see there the objective really in this next hour is to give you enough confidence and enough tools to be able to go and start with QGIS and start playing with hopefully local data that you can get from council or elsewhere. Okay, so first question is what is QGIS? It's spatial tech. I'm presuming that, we've got 9 in the room now. I'm presuming that you're all somewhat familiar with geospatial and what that means relating to the Earth and the space around the Earth. I've got a link there to a little story map that goes over some of the basics in terms of what geospatial is all about, some of the geospatial tools we talk about, and careers in spatial. So you can follow that story map in your own time to check that out. But really, I sort of talk quite regularly about spatial tools, and this is how I conceptualize it. We've got our pyramid here, and making up the base of that pyramid and making up the bulk of the ways that people interact with spatial tools. You have very simple online spatial tools. So it might be Google Maps, which, we've all jumped online and gone to Google Maps, or it might be, the US Geological Survey's earthquake mapper, or a bushfire mapper here, or the National Geographic map maker. So there's really simple online tools that have a kind of theme and limited tool set, limited data, but very effective at, highlighting issues in that area. This week, for instance, I posted out a map showing police killings in the US and how that related to the average, what would be expected in the average number of deaths per person. And so you could see where discrimination was highlighted. You couldn't do anything else. You couldn't overlay any other data, but it really brought to light which parts of the US, had more of a problem in this area. So that's just one example of those online spatial tools. Next, we have those interactive spatial tools where you're actually able to plot some of your own data, or you can interact with the data in some way. So a good example there is Google My Maps, which I show to teachers quite a lot. Google My Maps is fantastic. You can upload a spreadsheet of data that you've created, and you can visualize that data, and you can represent that data so that it can be analyzed. And fantastic little tool, but limited in functionality. So if you've played with Google My Maps, you'll know, for instance, if we're mapping, say that, well, we did malaria rates recently. So if we're mapping the rate of malaria around the world with Google My Maps, you can't actually choose those cutoffs. Numbers of people might go 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, 20 to 30. You might have a scale you'd like to follow, 0 to 50, 50 to 100, and so forth. But Google My Maps doesn't let you choose those class cutoffs. It gives you a limited range of colors, a limited range of analysis tools. So they actually used to limit the amount of data you could put into Google My Maps. So those sort of middle tier tools are the interactive spatial tools, and that's where I spend most of my time as someone who's working with teachers, is in these level 1 and level 2. But today we're going to focus on level 3, and this is an industry standard tool. QGIS is an open source GIS package, and almost a direct copy, I wouldn't say copy, but very comparable to something like Esri's ArcGIS. It's a GIS package. It's downloadable for the desktop, and you can bring in data and you can analyze it and you can create maps and do stuff with those maps. Very powerful tools. You have control of many aspects of the data and the layout and the projections and coordinate systems used to project the data, and you've got pretty much power over everything. You can go into the back end tables, you can adjust the data that way, you can add more data, take away data. So these QGIS is a really powerful industry level software package, and it's fantastic. It's a really great tool. So we're obviously going to get in and have a look at it soon. But yeah, I think if you've played with it in the past and not played with it for a couple of years, I think you'll find it's really stepped up, which is great. So spatial data, I'll just have a quick look in my chat window, by the way. If you've got any questions, fire away. Nothing in there. Okay, so spatial data is quite specific. The data used in spatial tools is quite specific. The Indigenous Mapping Workshop, as you can see on my screen now, I just need to clear my throat. Pardon me. The Indigenous Mapping Workshop it's an annual event, and you can probably tell what they do there. They have a great stack of resources online, and I was invited to present at the workshop this year, but because of COVID, it's been hopefully just postponed. It's in Melbourne this year. But I wanted to link to the source with basically the next sort of 10 or so slides. And I've given you a link there to the resources page, and in there you'll find a whole lot of QGIS stuff, which I highly recommend having a look at. So just want to highlight that all these slides are from that slide set. But spatial data basically is a representation of geographic and human features. So they enable us, as you can see there, to model reality. And that's a portion of the WA coastline. Spatial data is a representation of the real world. So you can see in the image on the left, we have the real world down the bottom. Then we have all these sort of individual layers of data we've collected, streets, political boundaries, and then you can see satellite images of land use and satellite-derived elevation data. And each of those features is part of a data set, a spatial data set. And those data sets come into maps as individual layers. So whenever you're looking at, this is a screenshot from QGIS on the right-hand side of the screen there. And whenever you're looking at say, streets or parcels or admin boundaries, each of those is an individual layer, but it's actually made up of multiple files. So another good reason to keep your data organized, well organized into folders, so you can just copy the whole folder as opposed to trying to extract individual files, which can be difficult. There are other ways around that too. Geodatabases are a kind of newish thing, and so they're convenient ways to package data as well. So, but essentially what we're looking at here is layers of data in the GIS are representations of what's happening out there in the real world. Now, our data can come in two forms. And if I just go back, actually, you'll see on the left there, they've been divided up for you. So there's vector data and raster data. And vector data is the most editable and the most interactive and the one you kind of end up using the most, except really for the satellite image. But vector data, as you can see here, is graphic features, so made up of vertices or points and then paths that join them together. So there's three types. There's points, lines, and polygons or shapes, which you may also see. And you can see how they work. So a point is a coordinate, a single coordinate. Lines will be coordinates that are connected, and then polygons connected and completed, and that gives us another dimension in terms of area as well. So yeah, they're the kind of data sets or types of data that you'll use the most. Points, if you're doing water quality testing, you'll go and collect your data at different points. If your students are surveying people on the street, they might use point data to record where they collected their surveys. Lines, might be a creek, or it might be a path. It might be a road, a highway. We're going to look at road data soon. That is in a line format. Pardon me, I just got to clear my throat again. Okay, my apologies there. So we'll be looking at line data in the form of roads, and then there's polygons, which would be different types of land use, or on a world map there'd be different countries. So they're the three kinds of spatial vector data you'll get. Raster data, on the other hand, is data that's made up of pixels. So typically your satellite image, and for schools, satellite images, aerial photos will make up 99% of your raster data, and you really won't need to do much apart from import it into your map and leave it. But I do want to point out, when you're looking at satellite imagery and when you're looking at digital elevation models, which are derived from satellite data, they also render that data as pixels, and that makes it raster data. So I guess I just want to highlight that, but yeah, essentially you can see their base maps for all the other pretty stuff will do. And there's a visual representation of how the same piece of Earth or same set of features could be represented using raster and vector data. Say that's a cul-de-sac, a one-way cul-de-sac, perhaps with a park in the middle, maybe different land use types around it. So there you can see how it's rendered as vector data and raster data. And the real power now with GIS and QGIS, of course, is that every one of those layers has its own what's called an attribute table. And with our vector data, so our aerial images, that table shows us the value of each pixel, the color, effectively, a color code for each pixel. Whereas in our vector data, that table can contain really powerful information. So if we go back to our examples before, we're looking at water quality, that table attached to these points would contain all of our water quality data, the turbidity and pH and temperature and so on. The lines, if we're looking at roads, the attribute table might consist of the name of each road, or the type or category of each road. And polygons, I think we said land use. So that might, indicate what type of land use it is, industrial, residential, and so forth. So those attribute tables, and you can see an example of one here. This is where all the power comes from. Now, this can also be where you get yourself into a bit of trouble. So you can see this example. I'll just bring it up bigger. And if you look, this is the table extracted from QGIS, and it's a piece of data around Indigenous place locality names or localities. And you can see there it's got a lot of information. So it's got a community ID number and code. It's got a common name, so that's probably what it's called, whereas there's secondary and other names, which might be other language names or other, you can see there's a difference. So there might be some sort of different language group, etc., that would require additional names. You can see we've got different categories, so town-based community, remote Aboriginal community. The occupancy is seasonal, permanent. So you can see there's a lot of data in there, population data. So it's numeric, it's text, and it's telling us all about these places. Really powerful, but it can be a bit daunting, and particularly when you're looking at government data. This one's pretty good, common name, secondary name, but some of these file names, these file headers can get pretty scary. And in the past, right now things are looking really good. We've got an open data standard that's been adopted across the world. most people are taking that up, and it means metadata is well organized and so forth, whereas it's not always the case, so you might get some pretty dodgy data. But key points to remember here are that each row in that table links to a different place. Each column gives us a different information or a different attribute. That's why it's called an attribute table. And I've got a little, here it is here. I've got a little, just a sort of simpler table just to highlight that again. So each column contains different data. This is Adelaide suburbs with some census data. And each row contains a different place, a different suburb. Finally, there's a range of different data formats that QGIS supports. Because it's open source means it's sort of collectively made. It's not for profit, it's not for sale. It's a really good example of that sort of collaboration. And because of that, there's no ties to certain brands or file types, which can be proprietary. So the Esri software, although it is quite it does accept a lot of file types now. Certainly in the past, it hasn't always been that open in terms of taking in Google files and other file types. So QGIS takes pretty much everything that is got some geographic link to it, and you can go and display it and view it. All right, so before we get into the demo, how am I looking for time? Okay, before we get into the demo, I just want to show you some support resources. So really, this is a place for you to come back to a bit later. There's a user guide, which has been, again, developed by the community. There's a training manual that takes advantage of some of the free training data that comes with it. There's some data from Alaska and elsewhere in the US, South Carolina and North Carolina. And the training manuals and user guides are really good. There's also, as a good sort of maybe recap for many of you, if you haven't had a look at this stuff for a while, there's this nice gentle introduction to GIS, which I think is really well leveled at teachers. And of course, I just can't tell you enough how useful YouTube is. It's a fantastic tool. I'm always learning on YouTube. I think it's brilliant that, again, similar kind of situation where people just collaborate and throw all these videos together into this one place. And there's some fantastic stuff on QGIS. I just recommend when you do search, limit your search, filter your search rather for the past year. And that way you'll get fairly regular, you'll get a version of QGIS that's at least close to what you've got now. I hadn't looked at QGIS for a while. When COVID hit and I outlined the webinars I was going to do, this being the last of them all, I got back into QGIS. So that was about, March. Had a quick look at it, downloaded it, and then again, last week I updated it again. And since March, it's updated from 3.8 to 3.10. So they're regularly updating it. They've actually got a build out of 3.12, but 10 is the latest stable build. So, it's great. There's a community out there keeping this thing updated and ready to go. And there's also good people putting stuff out on YouTube. So I've linked to a good starting video right there, but it's about a 30-minute long one. But yeah, there's plenty. Just jump in and do a search and away you go. All right. I've also got, again, just a reminder, this is the link to our data files if you want to follow along today. I'm going to use this web map, and there's the link for the web map. So I'll pop back in there later and grab that. Now, for additional data sets, when you want to start looking, beyond the data that I provide you with, or that the software comes with, and you want to start looking at your own backyard, here's the state level. Local council, cross your fingers and give it a shot. You can get some stuff from the ABS, although that's a bit clunky and hard to get. Some councils are covered under the Atlas ID, which I think you can download some of the data there. But these are the state level data repositories. Queensland actually has a really good one we'll look at today. But yeah, there's Australia-wide, and there's each, or at least most of the states there. Okay, now any questions before I flick over to QGIS and get the demo going? Does anyone have any questions? Is anyone following along and can't get the data or all looking good? I'll keep my eye on that chat window, but let me just get out of here. So I share my whole screen now. See how that looks. All right, great. So first we'll start QGIS. So I've downloaded. Okay, I'm just seeing a couple questions before I get started there. I just see a couple of questions. So Amanda, no worries. Give me a yell if you get stuck. Leanne, best way to store your data sets. Look, it depends on how you want to do it. I have a rule. If I put the word test into a file name or a folder name, it means it's scrap and I can delete it. I try and keep a pretty, you know, logical file structure. For me personally, I basically have a data folder, and then under there I have all my different types. So I downloaded a digital elevation model back in March. That sits there as DEM, a folder called DEM, and then inside that I've got all the data and all the projects that I played with around that data. I'll talk about projects in a sec. They all sit under that one folder. So I kind of like to have one overarching folder for any quote-unquote project that I'm going to do. So for instance, today's webinar for me consists of one project. Now to put that in a classroom context, it might be for every unit, you have a different folder. And then perhaps in that folder, you have a folder called test, and anything in that test folder gets cleared out every few weeks. It's just sort of like scrap paper. And then you might have another folder called, students or something like that, where you actually have your data sets for your students if you're using them that way. So yeah, just sort of keep them in logical folders for me around themes or around, in a school's case, around units. Okay, so when we do get QGIS downloaded, it's free, which is great. You can install it and away you go. It's popped a folder on my desktop here. My desktop's normally not this clean. I cleaned it up just for today. If I open up that folder, there's a few items in there. We won't worry too much about them all, but QGIS desktop, for me, it's 3.10. That's the one we want. All right, so let me just clear my screen a bit. I'll come back to that presentation and just pop this away. All right, so there's a few little areas I want to highlight first. You've got your normal menu bar along the top. A project is the top file, or top option in that menu, and then you're kind of pretty consistent with the most other tools there. Plugins and databases and webs and meshes, will leave all that for another day. But most of the stuff you'll be dealing with is up this end: project, edit, maybe view and layer at most. Then we've got a few menu bars, and you can see those little bars are all separated, and they're all clickable and draggable and move around. You can move them all around if you want. So they can float. All the toolbars can float. When you're editing, you can drag a toolbar out and play with it there if you want. Now let's see. I'm just looking at my screen. Are you guys seeing my cursor? Because it doesn't look like it from what I can see. Just let me know if you can't see when I'm pointing at stuff. You can. Okay, cool. Great. So we'll come back to some of those tools later. There's a bunch of navigation tools, which I had a screenshot up before there, which is probably the main area will work. There's a bunch of project tools there with, save and open, so forth. And then down below, we've got our editing tools, which we'll come to a bit later. On the left, we have this area here. Now, this is a bit new. If you're familiar with ArcGIS, it didn't really have this visible. This is called a browser, and this is where all of your data is organized. So we'll come back to all of that data a bit later, but by default, it'll open up, and that's what it'll look like. And then underneath that, I've got a section called layers and Currently, I don't have any layers, but we will in just a moment. So you can have a look at that in a minute. And down the bottom, we have this status bar. So that gives us things like, you can see there, our scale, our coordinates, our magnification, and so forth, and our projections, which we won't get into today either. All right, so I'm looking at my notes here. So let's open some data. Now, first we'll open up a project. Now, a project file is like a lot of other tools that use that kind of file structure. A project file is your overarching file that wraps all of your spatial data up together, basically. So that later on you can go back and open your project file and it'll bring in all of your different layers of data. So we'll save a project a little bit later. But we're not going to open we'll open an empty project first. When you start working a bit more with QGIS, on that splash screen, you'll see all of your recent projects, which is quite handy, and it gives you a little visual kind of thumbnail, which is good for getting back into your projects. So here's our empty project. It's not very exciting at this point, but we're going to bring in some data. So there's actually a bit of data built in, and I found from the video that I've linked to before, I found this little trick. If you go down to the coordinate section down the bottom of the screen and you type in the word world and hit enter, it brings up a world layer of data. So this is perfect for just helping people get used to the tool, and perfect for what we're doing today. So here's my data layer. You can see now in the layers section we have world map. You can see there's a checkbox that means it's turned on. I can turn it off if I want. And there's the symbol attached to that, which is sort of a beige color, which will change in just a moment. Along the top, we've got some navigation tools, and you can see if I can bring it up here. Just back in the presentation, I've got some screenshots there to show you what they are. But you can see we've got a pan tool. We can pan to areas we've selected. We can zoom in and out. Zoom full is handy if you get lost. You can zoom right back to the full data. If you've selected data, you can zoom to it, zoom to certain layers. You can go back a level in zoom, and then you can add bookmarks for zoom. So if you want to keep your map on, a particular country, Chad, you can bookmark Chad and come back to it. So I'll endeavour to do that in just a minute. So let's have a look at changing our symbols firstly. So let's move my reading stuff out of the way. There's a couple of ways to go about it. You can simply right click, and in there you get a whole bunch of options, but one of them is properties, and that will allow you to change a whole lot of stuff related to that layer. In there's one called symbology, and you can see we've got currently this simple fill, which is basically one color fill. You can see there's the color. We can customize that by just clicking on the color itself. So let's pick something more green. You get a little preview, and let's apply that. So if I hit OK, it should update my countries to green. I also spoke to you before about the attribute table. If we right click on our layer, we can open up that attribute table. So the right click on a layer gives you a layer kind of context menu. If we open up that table, you'll see we've got all of these different countries. We've got, looks like country codes, and some ID. I'm not even sure what that is. So, but what is useful is if we pick let's see a country here, United States. If I click on that in the table, you can see it highlights it on the map. So each row relates to a different place, and then each column relates to a different piece of information. So in this case, a country code. So yeah, I just want to show you that there's that connection, and that's a selection as well. What I've just done there is selected a country. So let's pick Australia. So you can see there that I've selected a country, and it's picked out Australia for me on the map. Okay, so that's the link between the table and the map. I want to show you your basic navigation now. So you saw me pan the map before when I moved to Australia. So let's click and drag. You can see by default your pan tool is selected, so it will always do that for you. You can zoom in by scrolling your mouse. And, you know, scrolling and panning kind of gets you where you want most of the time. Go to NZ. You can scroll in and out, and away you go. So pretty handy way to bring up some data. If you do get lost, you zoom in too far, and you know it won't be you; it'll be your darling year nines, and they'll be screaming at you, "This or sir, I'm lost. Where do I go?" You can click on this button here, the full zoom full, and that will take you right back to the full extent of your data. You can also, when you do get more layers, you can pick an individual layer and zoom to that layer if you want. There we go, zoom to layer. So that's another handy way to get around. So yeah, that's pretty good. So if we let's start getting in a bit more local. So I'm going to go down to Southeast Queensland. You can see now we start to lose a little bit of resolution. That data, that world data set's quite global. We want to bring in something a bit better. Now, I've told you before in this section called the browser, this is where your data is organized. And in there, you can see there's my C drive, so that's my computer, and I can go in and find my data location. But there's some other options there. A lot of those are quite scary looking, but don't worry. In here, there's a bit of data built in. So if you go to this XYZ tiles and open it up, the only option built in is the OpenStreetMap. So if we right click on that and add it to our project, you'll see it'll slide down here onto the map. And you can see it's brought in another data layer. So let's go to Moreton Bay in Brisbane, just off Brisbane. You can see the computer is rendering all that data for me. It's starting to slow down a little, I think. The GoToMeeting software takes a bit out of my computer as well. But it was good because you could see all that different data, and you could see that there's that world map underneath. It loads that, and now it's loading this OpenStreetMap data on top. That OpenStreetMap data, it's pulling from the web. So there's a lot going on. I'm just going to turn the world map off for now. And even though nothing changed on our screen, that actually will make rendering a bit faster. So you can see the OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is a fantastic tool. It's like a Wikipedia, but a map. So people have gone and you can edit it yourself if you like. So this is Moreton Bay, just off Brisbane coast. I'm just sort of scanning through. You can see different sort of areas. We've got swamp areas, mangrove areas. We've got water areas. You've got parklands and so forth, all visible there in the map. And if we zoom in, that sharpens up a lot as well. So a really nice little application and a quick way for you to bring in some local data. Now, I want to bring in that bit of data that I set up for you. Now, let me just quickly, before I bring my next data set in, any questions? I'm looking at my chat window. I don't see any questions. Everyone's looking good. We've actually got a couple more people pop in, so let me grab that presentation link for you all who have just arrived. But let's have a look. Debbie, I clicked off layers. How do I get that back? So, you turn the layers section off. Okay, so if you right click in this gray area, you'll see now you've got to do it sort of in an empty part of your menu area, so not on a menu bar, but you'll see there's a layers panel. So I'll turn mine off and show you there. I've turned my layers section off. If I right click in here and go layers panel, that'll pop that layers panel back. So any more questions as I'm going, just pop them in that window. Just mindful of time, we're pretty good at 20 minutes. I'm going to show you now how to bring in some additional data. So one really cool thing is you can bring in data from the web. So I've shown you that OpenStreetMap data, but remember back here, I have this link to a Queensland web map. Now, Queensland Government have this Queensland Spatial Catalogue called QSpatial. And in there you can go and search for all sorts of data, roads, bushfires, water, bodies. There's stacks and stacks and stacks of data. And yeah, it'll bring you to the data and away you go. Now I actually didn't link to the data set, so that's good because I can show you how I found it. So what I'm going to do now is find one of the things the Queensland Government does, and most governments will do, is they serve their data out via the web. So if you go down here to content type and you go to service, that's what I've organized here. You can see that there's some what they call web map services, or WMS. Now there's survey control points, not overly fascinating. Moreton Bay 1955 might be. We might come back and take a look at that. You can see there's mine data, just a general base map for Queensland. There's a whole stack of data sets that a whole range of people can use. This is the one I want to look at, the Queensland Imagery Whole of State Satellite Public Base Map. So if we click on that live service and we copy down this file, there's copy link there. Sometimes that doesn't work, so I'm going to play it safe. If I copy that link and go back to my QGIS, in there, pardon me, there's a section called WMS, and I can click on that. Oh, there you go, I've already done it, but I can click on that. I can add a new connection, and I can pop that URL in there with a name. So I've already put my Queensland Government name there. QGov, I'll just pop that in and show you. So if I hit OK, that then brings that service into my web map. Basically, it makes a connection between my QGIS and the Queensland Government servers, sorry, and it should allow you to then to view that data. So if we open that data up, you can see latest satellite all users. If I right click and add layer to project, cross our fingers, oh, there we go. Now I got this warning before and it did pop up, but you can see that's the latest satellite pass for me. It will only go so far, so I'm just going to zoom in slowly to the headland here and see how far down we can go. Actually surprised we're able to go this far. So, and you can see the resolution is pretty fantastic. You know, it's the Port of Brisbane. You can see individual boats flying through. This is all satellite data, and yeah, I didn't check the date, but it's live. It should be a live data or close to live. So there's just a quick example of how to bring in a couple of different data sets. Now our roads data, that's the last one I want to show you. So we've got some good data for the state of Queensland. We've brought in our web services. Let me grab that road data for you next. You just bear with me. Now, okay, sorry, I've just stopped sharing. I didn't like what I was doing. Let me go back now to share, and that should work. So here's my data. Where did I put it? Oh, I thought I put it there. I must have put it in here. I did. Here it is. Okay, so it's in the wrong spot. But here's my data set, and if I go in there, I can actually just drop that onto my QGIS. So just drag and drop that data package onto my file. I'll minimize that screen there. So I've just grabbed the data G package, geo package basically. And if I bring QGIS up again, you'll see now we've got this other data layer that's popped in on my map. It's a little bit hard to see, so I'm just going to update the color so you can see it a bit better. There we go. So you can see that that's it's state government controlled roads, so it's not down to the local level. It's basically the main roads in Queensland. And you can see that overlays perfectly with our, we'll go out here to Straty. And you can see that overlays with our satellite image really well. So yes, Debbie, I'll add that link there. Sorry, I didn't see your question. Now, it doesn't look like that link will take you all the way to the data, pardon me. But if you scroll down that page, the one you're looking for, maybe I can get a link there. Let me try this one. Okay, try that link, that second link with the big code after it. I reckon that'll get you there. And in there, you're looking for the live services button. That's, I presume you meant the satellite imagery. Look at that satellite imagery. It's fantastic, isn't it? You can see longshore drift in action. It's beautiful. But more importantly, our roads are overlaid, and that talks to the fact that all of these layers of data have the same underlying spatial information. So we've created this little model of the world, and all of that data is overlaid perfectly for us. So are there any questions now on bringing in data, displaying data, anything like that? I'm just going to clear my throat again, but if you've got any questions, fire away. Pardon me. No questions. All right, great. So what I think we want to do now, we've brought in all this different data. We've started mucking around with it. I think we found a nice little corner of the world we want to keep our eye on. Let's save a project so that we can come back and we don't have to do all those steps again. And all of our data will be sitting waiting for us. The roads will be yellow and so on and so on. So let's do that. I actually want to make them a bit thicker. So before we do anything, I'm just going to increase the width a bit. Okay. So up here in our project section, we can go to save or save as. We haven't saved it before. And it'll ask us where we want to save that data. Now, actually, what I should have done was I should have moved my data first before I brought the project in. So it's too late for me now, but learn from my mistakes, everyone, and have your data in the right folder when you start, which is what I wanted to do. So here's this was our Queensland roads. I was working with SEQ roads earlier. We'll put Queensland roads and satellite image, and we'll hit save. And you can see that file type there, QGZ. That's a QGIS project file there. And basically it's just a tiny little text file that references all of those other files. The reason I hesitated with moving the data was if I had moved my data, I would have lost the link from my data to my project. So have all your data in the right spot before you set your project up. So there's our project file. You can see now on the top of the screen, our project file should be named Queensland Road Satellite Image. And anytime I make a change to that, so let's just, we'll change the color of our world map to a darker green. Let's do that. You'll see that now I get a little apostrophe, asterisk. That means that there's a change that's been made to my project that I haven't saved. So if I just hit save, that'll go away and my project file's up to date. So it's a nice handy way to kind of manage all of your data. If you do want to send people a project, have the project in the same folder as the data. And that way you can then just copy the folder itself. You can zip that whole folder up. You can send them that zip folder. They can unzip it and they'll have their project file and all of the data. So when they open it up at their end, all the roads will look just like ours, and the view will be set to this location, and so on. Actually, speaking of views, that was one thing I didn't show you, was how to do a bookmark. So let's do one here. I'll just go in. I think that's Amity Point, isn't it? So we can grab this new spatial bookmark button, and when we want to come back in, we can click on our spatial bookmarks and choose the one we want. So we'll call this one Amity. Try it again and spell it properly. But you can group them all and so forth. There's the different extents, and if we hit save, that'll be saved, and we can go back later and access those from using our spatial bookmarks up here. So yeah, now I'm going to show you one last thing, and that is how to create your own data. And there's a nice little feature that QGIS have added that makes it easy. Essentially up here, you've got a toolbar that lets you add different data types. Now, the kind of the most common way to move data nowadays seems to be the GeoPackage. GeoPackages, rather than an old Esri shapefile, which is just here, which a shapefile is one layer of data. So my roads would be one shapefile. My water bodies would be one shapefile. My land use would be one shapefile. Whereas a GeoPackage allows you to put multiple kind of shapefiles in together. So look, it doesn't really matter. What I really like though is this temporary scratch layer that QGIS have added. So it's great for mucking around. We'll use one here. We'll call ours Treasure Island. We're going to make ours a polygon, but here's where you choose whether it's a point, a line, or a shape. We're going to make ours a polygon. You can include a Z, an altitude dimension if you wish, but we'll keep it simple today, and away we go. So we've created a new layer, and you can see Treasure Island, but there's nothing yet. We haven't actually drawn any features. You'll also notice, you may have picked up, that when I created that layer, this toolbar became active. A lot of these tools became active. And if I click on another layer, such as my roads, these tools become inactive. That's because these are my editing tools, and my editing's turned on, and you can see I'm able now to edit some data. So let's go to this one, which is, if you hover your mouse, you'll see it's Add Polygon. And let's add a little island out here in Moreton Bay. The reason I'm doing it here is that it'll give us some real world coordinates and measurements. So we'll have a kind of an appropriately scaled island, and I'm just making it up as I go along, really. You can see I'm clicking my mouse every time my island changes direction. I could be really technical and follow a feature, so you could follow this sandbar down here. You can zoom in. I'm not zooming in. And whenever you're ready to finish, you can right-click your mouse, and your feature will draw. Now, what happened to my feature? You see down here, because it's listed at the bottom of all of my layers, it's actually been drawn on top. Other layers have drawn on top of it. I'm just going to click and drag it and bring it right to the top there. There we go. So you can see there's my Treasure Island. Now I've got some other tools which are quite handy here that I can play around with. So if we want to click on Treasure Island, we can bring in this vertex tool, and this allows me to edit my shape. So how am I for time? I've got a couple of minutes. I've got to be quick, but you can see I can edit my shape here. So if I want to soften that edge, I can click and drag, whoops, that shape around. You can change where those vertexes are positioned, or you can actually change the line in between. You can drag it, extrude the whole line out if you wish. So there's lots of ways to edit your data. Yes, I see Marcel just popped in. Yes, Marcel, definitely recording this, and I'll put the link out over the weekend. What else do I need to show you with our island? Oh, let's change let's make the properties a bit more island-like. Go around to green. There we go. So you can add data a number of ways as well. Oh, I didn't hit OK. Excuse me. It's better. You can use transparency. You can do a whole lot of stuff with regards to your shapes. There's ways to label. If we open up our attribute table now, see there's nothing in it yet, but we can add information to that attribute table. We can add fields, we can add additional data as well to that as we add more features. What else have I? Oh, my print layout, that was what I needed to show you. So um, I'm just looking at Leanne's question. You use polygons in here to create choropleth maps, or is that way too hard? You could definitely use polygons to create choropleth maps, Leanne, and that's a perfect application for it. It's probably an intermediate session, like the next session, I'd cover something like that. But yeah, basically, in a nutshell, you can either manually enter the data yourself into the table, or you can join a table. But when you go into the table, when you right click, the world map was a good example. When you right click and go into the table, you can add columns of data. You can organize your columns, you can do all sorts of stuff. So that's where that would all happen. Now, really quickly, everyone, just because you want to, get right to the end, print layout. My print layout, call this one. You can see you get a little kind of tool that allows you to create the print layout. You can got a bunch of things you can add to your map over here on the left, and the first is obviously going to be the map window. It's just taking a moment to render. You've got a legend option in there. I don't think I've got anything much in my legend. Yeah, I need to tidy that up, but you can go into the properties and tidy up your legend. There's a title bar there. There's a scale bar. Let me just throw that on and show you really quickly. And each one of those features, if you right click, you can go into the properties. The properties over here allow you to change your units and so forth. So I won't, it's sort of the end of the day, end of the week. I won't hammer you with that now, and I've got 1 minute to wrap up. But yeah, so I just wanted to show you, there's your layout option. And my map looks horrendous, but you can put a title in. You can put a little note section to say who the author was. You can make it look a lot better than that. Now, I'm going to go back into my presentation. Any questions there on anything we've covered so far? Nothing coming in. Just while we're wrapping up, firstly, thank you for your time. I've got a little section here for feedback for the day, and what I'm more interested really in is where you would like to see these QGIS workshops going next. So yeah, as Debbie says, they're great to have a play, muck around with some data, get your head around it, and it'd be great to hear where you'd like to take QGIS next, or just spatial in general. So please, your feedback there is really important to make sure that these webinars are interesting and useful for people. And yeah, thanks for your time. And if you want to get in touch with me, there's my contact details. Pardon me. I'll make a recording of this video. I'll get that out to you over the weekend. And look, if you've got any questions at all about QGIS, it's certainly that next step up, and I applaud you for taking on the challenge. I would really love to see people succeed. So if you've got any questions about it, fire away and we'll see if we can help out. But keep your eye out on our social media for more webinars in the future. I'm definitely going to be keeping these going. They've been really popular, and yeah, thanks for your support. Thank you, Melina. I'm glad you've enjoyed them. Yes, Debbie. So mapping those skills over time is definitely, if you've got that luxury of being able to influence, I guess, the whole 7 to 12 or even P to 6. Yeah, it's really useful to do that, because the QGIS is probably not going to come into play until senior. And it might be that you start the students off with, that level 1 tier stuff in year 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10. They can start looking at Google My Maps, and then senior they can start pushing themselves a bit further. But those online tools are really great for senior as well. So I'm glad you followed along, Amanda. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to do it. And thank you, Debbie and Gemma. Thank you, Leanne. Yes, Lauren, I'll get the video out and you can check it out later. No worries, Patricia. I know what it's like, VIT, don't worry. Oh, it's great to hear, Marcel. Yeah, and if you want to flick us any of your tours on the links on social media, I'd love to, showcase them. keeping in mind privacy, etc. But yeah, always love to see people using all the stuff we cover. All right, look, everyone, I think 4:32. Thank you for staying with us. I'm going to wrap up. I'll stop recording and I'll let you get on with your day. So thanks again for your support. See you all.